Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today we're so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Adam Scott to talk about his Apple TV Plus show Severance. And I was really fascinated in how you approached building your character for this show in particular, because you're playing a character who has an entire world within the workplace, an entire world outside. Obviously, those two aren't connected. And so I was interested in how you kind of built out the idea of like two different characters that have different experiences, sometimes different emotional responses to things. They both know different pieces of information. And at the same time, there's always a linear thread between them, because it's not just a case of building two versions at the beginning, but tracking the two versions throughout the entire show. So I was interested in kind of how you managed that for yourself in terms of his emotional trajectory in both of those spaces.
Yeah, it's interesting because both of them change quite a bit over the course of the season. Yeah, it was definitely a challenge, a very fun, endlessly interesting challenge, but it was sort of like a math problem to figure out, kind of on a day to day. I mean, it was really important to Ben and I and Dan Erickson, the creator, that it feel like one guy, right? Like this is one character. It's not two different characters. It's because, like, as an actor, it's hard to resist, like your first instinct is like, oh, okay, I want this other one I want one of them to have a mustache and like a cool hat or something like that, but this is the same person. It's just two different parts of the same person. Like everyone has different sides of themselves, and this it's almost like two halves of one person. So, the Mark that lives in the outer world is, is 40 some odd years of life experience with like, sorrow and joy and, all the things that go into a full life. And then Mark on the inside is, for all intents and purposes, 2 years old. But he has those same feelings. Mark on the outside is grieving his wife. And so he brings a lot of sadness with him to work. And so Mark on the inside has those feelings in him. He just doesn't, have the wherewithal to name them or locate them or know what they are. So as far as playing the two different sides, it was just a constant kind of game of addition and subtraction. As far as, this one's like kind of a clean slate. This one has all of this baggage, but what of that baggage is carried in kind of just physiologically? What is unavoidable that you would feel on the way in? What instinctively does this one have that this one does not? What sort of common sense things carry through? So it was a lot of asking Dan, like, because he's the one that sort of, it's his world that he thought up, and so, like, just it was constant kind of back and forth through the 10 months we were shooting of trying to figure. And like you said, there was a lot of change and both of them have a specific arc that they go through, and we were shooting the whole show at once. So we weren't going like episode by episode. So we were jumping all over the place throughout. So it was also trying to come up with a very kind of set path and knowing exactly where we were in the story on any given day. So it was it was a big challenge. It was really, really fun. It was there was never a day when, got home and didn't feel like we were kind of worked to the bone.
And you're bringing up there the idea that both of these versions of the character go through a lot of change. And when you watch the whole season, who they both are at the end is very different from the beginning. And yet it's very minute and nuanced changes. If you take the workplace version of him, it's not that he suddenly turns around and expresses his dissatisfaction and his rising feelings of dissent. It's very small actions and choices. And because he also kind of comes across as someone who's more introverted and internalizes a lot, I was interested in how you kind of found that trajectory of that very gradual build and what you wanted those expressions to be.
Yeah, I think, in a world like the inner world of Lumen, it's a very repressed environment, right? And so something we were kind of constantly kind of, amused by while we were making the show is what a big deal everything was for these people down in this world, because it's so protected, and everything you do and say is so observed, right? That, finding a book is a huge deal that we have to really stop and think about how to handle this. A book just sitting on a chair is like a scandal. And so John and Zach and Britt and I were always just kind of laughing about just how big the world is to these people, because their whole life has been in this office. So as far as how the kind of incremental change that happens to the inner part of Mark, it's very small things that happen, and it's a series of them that happen, because he is a very this is all he knows, and what he knows is the sort of power hierarchy of this place is all he knows. And so when someone comes in and starts talking about that in a way that's different than how everyone has talked about it, everyone has kind of referred and talked to it up to that point, then your immediate reaction, your knee jerk, is to reject it. But if those things, once something is said, it's sort of out there. And so then that becomes part of your awareness. And so then you start noticing things a little differently. And the world sort of opens up a little bit. And then the book comes into the picture. Did you see the whole show?
Yeah.
Okay. The book sort of comes into the picture, and that creaks the world up, opens the world up just a little bit more. So it's all these really small incremental things that start kind of widening the aperture for the inner Mark and everyone in the inner world. I don't want to spoil anything, but I think just by the nature of where we are and what our circumstances are, the progression from where we start and where we end has to be incremental, because the things that actually occur by our standards in the world we know are quite small, but everything is magnified down there in its importance.
And with the way that you're talking about it there, did you kind of, from a psychological standpoint, think of it to some degree as conditioning that he's escaping? Because when he has a colleague who's coming into this workplace, into this severance setting for the first time, we see a lot of the conditioning that they're imparting on her. You're going to sit in this room and you're going to say this thing so many times out loud that you believe it. Or even just the fear of Patricia Arquette's character, who's the boss, that she instills, where they feel like everything has to be orderly. And your character is like a diehard company man at the beginning of the show. And so did you also kind of think about it as like this conditioning and this gaslighting that they've been doing on him for like the last 2 years, and how that strips down?
100%. I think that just because of the nature of who he is in the outside world, and whatever he's brought in with him from there, just physiologically who he is, he has a bit more of an analytical mind, right? But he's in this environment where that isn't really embraced or encouraged, but it's still there. he's just choosing not to use it, both because he's not aware that it's something that could be used, and he's never really used it before, but it's still there. So you can't really help it. So it's more a kind of willing himself not to, and just staying the course and not being interested in anything upsetting the apple cart. But once Helly comes in and just starts kind of looking at it from a different perspective, it's like, saying, don't picture an elephant. There's nothing you can do. You're seeing the elephant. And so I think Mark, by nature of who he is, has to start looking around some different corners. From the very moment she arrives, it's just a matter of when is he actually going to take that peek around the corner, or is he going to will it away? Yeah. But he knows it's possible, and has a feeling that there's something there, but he just is like, what are you doing? Why would you even ask that question?
And he obviously has a really strong reason for going through severance in the first place, stemming from the loss of his wife. And so when it came to his outside version, this is a character who's kind of at a stagnant place in his life. Him and his wife had tried to have kids, so where his life is now without her is so far apart from where he expected it to be at this point. And there's that scene in one of the first episodes where he's won a gift card to a restaurant and he just goes by himself for a VIP experience, and that kind of tells us everything about his world at the beginning. And so how did you think about his kind of like status of stasisness and being a little bit stuck within himself, and also where he was with grief, because he's had kind of 2 years to try and process it, but also is choosing not to. For him, going through severance is not having to think about the pain for 8 hours. So that's half the time that he's not kind of focusing in on himself.
Yeah, I think that he hasn't moved on at all. It's been 2.5 years, and he just has not even begun the healing process of losing his wife. And I think you're right. I think that's a conscious choice. And I think ultimately it's that, it could be that if he heals and he moves on, that means he's saying goodbye forever to his wife. It's almost like this pain is all he has left of her. So he's going to hang on to it as long as he can. But it is pain, and he doesn't want to feel it. So his life is now waking up in the morning, driving to a building, and then he just immediately is leaving the building and driving home and eating and going to sleep. That's what his life is now. Most of his life is now a blank void, where he just disappears and doesn't have to feel anything. So I think that's where we find him, is that this is what he's chosen. He's dead set to continue living his life this way. He will not move on from Gemma, from his wife. And everyone's kind of throwing judgment his way about both his choice and the company that he's working for. But that's what he's doing. It's his life, and that's the way he wants to spend it.
But I do like that kind of, as he starts to question things a lot more, that also, as well as opening up certain questions, allows him to also re-access joy in himself. And, we get to see it in a couple of different ways. At one point, he's at a concert, and he starts kind of joining in on some of the lyrics, and that's like a really great outlet for him. Or in the workplace when they have the mandated 5-minute dance party. I was interested in how you wanted to like tap into like who is he in these moments where he is kind of finding this joy, because it's a very foreign thing to him. And so even just in terms of like how you figured out what are his dance moves, this isn't something that he does frequently. So how does he move in this moment?
Yeah, it's a funny question, because it is like, wow, these people may never have danced before. I mean, there may have been another 5-minute or 15-minute, whatever it is, the kind of allotted time for the dance party. Maybe Mark had been there for one of them, but I kind of thought he hadn't. He'd just been hearing about it for a couple of years, that this might happen at some point. So this is the first time he's danced. It's not like they watch television. You don't see people dancing. So that was a thing on set. We were like, well, how do we know how to dance? And so just like the alphabet and knowing the English language and having some sort of common sense instilled in you when you wake up there for the first time, there are certain things you carry over from one to the other. So I think Mark's dancing is just sort of the very rudimentary, I am now moving my body to this music, trying to come up with something that could exist without any outside influence whatsoever, and it resulted in the dance that you see on the show.
And I also wanted to ask about working on scenes with Patricia Arquette, because you get to play with her kind of very deliciously in two very different facets, because your character meets her in the inside world and the outside world. And so in the inside world, in the office, you know, she's the tyrant of the boss that doesn't even have to say a word out loud to him in the room. And he already knows that he's in trouble. He knows what he did, and he knows that he's going to get punished. And, you know, there's a lot of fear in that dynamic. And then in the outside world, she's his neighbor. And so their interactions are about trash cans and completely nonsensical, you know, not anywhere near as important things. And so I was interested in kind of like the dynamic in getting to take these two different facets of your character and play them off against very different characters that she's portraying as a result.
Yeah. So this will come out after the show comes out? Okay, good. Because that's a reveal at the end of the first episode, I think. Yeah, I mean, Patricia's always been one of my favorite actors. She's, you know, for years and years, I just love her work so much. She's someone who just invests in her work and just goes full bore into these characters. I mean, she's just spectacular. And you know, Escape from at Dannemora a couple of years ago, and then also, is it The Vow? Is that the limited series?
Hulu
yeah, the Hulu show.
I think so.
Unbelievable. These performances are unbelievable. And then in Severance, she continues that. Yeah, I mean, you know, doing a scene with Patricia, I just would go in and react, you know, try and find my way through, because in both circumstances, in the inside and outside, Mark with Cobell and Selvig in the outside world, these are both dominating personalities who are taking all of the power in the relationship and in the whatever circumstance they're in. She is driving and manipulating. And so Mark just has to sort of hold on and try and find his way through and try and wrangle whatever power, whatever he can to just sort of stay afloat in those relationships, is kind of all he could do. So as sort of walking into the scene as an actor, it's a lot of just taking her in and trying to listen and trying to just make your way through it, and seeing how the character gets out the other side without being so completely manipulated and controlled that he's doing something totally outside his self-interest.
And overall, with the duality of the way that you got to play this performance throughout the series, what was the aspect that you found to be the most challenging of all of that?
Like between the two different sides?
Yeah, or just like in general, like with this role, kind of like what were the unique challenges against other characters that you've played?
Yeah, I mean, everything about it was sort of a unique challenge, because, you know, I kind of approached it with a just I like to try and find the personal way in to, I kind of try and usually start with what do I have in common with the one character or the other, and try and find all of those things that I directly understand and relate to with my life, and trying to apply that, and then find all the differences, and then try to find with the differences, then try to attack that and make it personal, try and figure out how to understand it, to then fold that in. And with this, so with this, I kind of approached it like just the sort of state that each side of him is in. At the beginning of the story, I sort of thought that the outside Mark, I felt like, for me, Adam, it's all the things that I hate about myself. I am sometimes odd and don't feel odd and don't know exactly what to say in larger groups of people, particularly people who seem very comfortable and verbose. I don't have great posture. I tried to sort of find all of those things, and because I feel like there's a certain amount of exhaustion with the Mark on the outside, exhaustion with his life in general, and he's sort of had it with himself. And I think that's part of his reasoning for going down there 8 to 10 hours a day, is that he's just sick of himself. It's in a way, it's like a punishment to himself. And I think self-loathing is something everybody understands. And so I tried to focus in on what that is. But I also find navel gazing boring to watch. So I didn't want it to be that. So it needed to be folded in as a particular crease in whatever we're doing, rather than the entire thing. As far as the innie Mark, there's something, those are where you can find the things that you sort of like about yourself, the things you feel more kind of confident in, or think about the times when you've been at your most confident, and why you were like, you know what, I'm all right. This is like not bad. Like, this feels pretty good to be me today, and tried to kind of harness that feeling, at least, at the beginning of the story. And so that's sort of where I started, at least, in trying to wriggle my way in and figure out who these different parts of him were, or at least where it started.
Yeah. Well, it's a really remarkably impressive performance, and particularly when you step back and look at the sum of the whole of what you've managed to build throughout the entire season, kind of going back to the nuance and the detail in it. So congratulations on everything with the show, and thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.